My name is Justin Baker. I'm gonna do this right. My name is Justin Baker. I'm gonna talk about drugs. Just so you know, the stories you're about to hear have never been told in public before. You're all guinea pigs. It'll be clear why in a second. All right. First time I did acid, I was nearly involved in a horrific wreck involving a pair of deer. I will now explain. It was the summer of 1999, and I was 19 years old. My best boyhood friend Dean and I took a substantial hit of LSD and went to a movie theater not far from our home in suburban Detroit. We went to see Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and we timed the peak of our acid trip perfectly for the famous pod race scene. If anybody remembers this? The force was flowing through us, I assure you. Young Anakin Skywalker, father of Luke, won the pod race, won his freedom from slavery. Everybody was elated, including the 12-year-olds all around me who didn't know I was tripping. Little did they know he grows up to be a despotic mass murderer. Their parents didn't appreciate it when I told them that. Anyway, the force, like psychedelics, is not for everyone. Anyway, Dean and I had a great time, except when we left the movie theater and discovered we were in a torrential downpour. Now, under normal circumstances, if you're not hallucinating on drugs, this is not a problem. You stay in the mall an extra hour, you get a Cinnabon, you go on with your life, wait it out. For those of you who have not done high-dose psychedelics, I assure you a shopping mall is like the worst possible place to be. So we sprinted out to Dean's car and then sat in a giant concrete parking structure with rain pouring down on us and tried to wait it out. We waited it out for what felt like hours, probably 5 minutes, before Dean looked at me and said, "Let's just go, man." Dean, I don't think that's a good idea. Do you want to spend the rest of our acid trip in this parking structure? Well, when you're right, Dean. Let's risk our lives. Now, before you judge my 19-year-old self too harshly, we had thought about this. We were only 2 miles from the neighborhood we grew up in. It was a single straight shot down one main road, no turns. So we had thought about this. And we had driven down this road hundreds, if not thousands of times in our youth in suburban Detroit. And not once, I repeat, not once had we ever encountered deer. This was an inner ring suburb of Detroit. We were not in Minnesota. But sure enough, about half a mile from our neighborhood, 2 majestic does come galloping across the Newburgh Road. We're going 45 miles per hour in a Ford Escort. And somehow, Dean was a very skilled navigator under various substances. He slammed on the brakes right away. We slid across the road and stopped about 10 or 15 feet short of total bloody disaster. The deer stopped and looked at us and then finished crossing the road. About 30 seconds later, we stopped screaming, looked at each other and said, "Only when you're tripping, man." 25 years later, I'm like 90% sure that actually happened. Who knows? Felt pretty real. I mean, this is a 4-part story. You just heard part 1, psychedelics are not toys. We're moving into part 2, psychedelics are medicine now. Quick disclaimers, as mentioned before, I am not a chiropractor, but nor am I a medical doctor of any kind. Please do not take inspiration from anything I told you tonight. Do something stupid and then sue me. Number 2, plant-based psychedelics have been decriminalized in Minneapolis, so also no need to report anything you hear to the authorities. Okay. Level set, I don't know where all of you are on the word psychedelics or the term. When I say the word psychedelics, I am largely referring to 4 psychoactive compounds: psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, and MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy. There are many other psychoactive compounds, but these are like the 4 main players right now in the United States being used in curated experiences and research and so forth. So, and each of these has a really fascinating story of origin, a body of research, psychopharmacology, history, whatnot. There is no way I'm going to tell you all of that in 20 minutes. So if you have specific questions about these sorts of things, please feel free to ask me in the Q&A section. I'm here to inform, but mostly to tell stories. On a macro level, what's really interesting to me is that in the 25 years since Dean and I nearly had a bloody disaster, these things have gone from street drugs, mainly being used by risk-taking adolescent punks like us, to plant medicine, improbably, that are now being studied for their effects with difficult to treat mental health issues, with enlightenment, for lack of a better word, and respectable grown-ups. People you know are curious and trying these things. And if you have friends and or a working internet connection, I am willing to bet, because we're in Northeast Minneapolis, you have heard anecdotes like this, maybe even from people you know. This is a person I know, personally. I've been doing cognitive behavioral therapy for 30 years, but it wasn't until I did guided psychedelics that everything changed. I felt more myself after one session than after 30 years of talk therapy. I met myself in therapy. Another friend of mine, who I promise you I've never even seen take a sip of alcohol, did an ayahuasca ceremony and said, "Words failed to speak to the depth of cosmic size of gratitude and love I felt in my first ceremony. I communed with Mother Ayahuasca. She challenged me and ultimately showed me things well beyond the scope of what I thought it was to be human." Pretty profound stuff. This guy I never met, but I want to. Over and over again, I had the sense of infinity being multiplied by another infinity. I joked to my wife as she drove me home that I felt as if I'd been repeatedly sucked into the asshole of God. I've never had that experience on psychedelics, but maybe I'm not taking big enough doses. Anyway, there are more stories like this. This is literally printed in an academic research study. University of Johns Hopkins. So by now you're maybe wondering, other than my misfit youth, what am I doing up here talking about psychedelics? You seem like a respectable human being. That's a good question. Best way for me to answer that without spending again, much longer than 20 minutes describing my background. People in this emerging field of psychedelic therapy generally fall into 4 buckets of expertise. There are mental health practitioners, there are researchers in psychology or neuropsychology, there are people who are teachers and experts in mind body traditions, and those who are actually quite focused on the psychedelia itself. For whatever reason, I happen to have at least one foot in all of these worlds. In some cases, 2. And what happens is when anybody in my general circle gets the little bug and reads that Michael Pollan book, they call me and they say, "Baker, you've done mushrooms, right?" "Yeah." "Do you think I should do mushrooms? Would you do mushrooms with me? Would you guide me?" And you would be shocked at the number of calls I get like this. People coming out of the woodwork, people I haven't talked to in 20 years. "Baker, I just did mushrooms." Anyway. So my answer to that question is generally a really strong maybe. Let's call me, let's talk about it. I'm not one of those people who thinks we should just put acid in the water supply. That's not me. These compounds are powerful, but I do think there is a lot to learn from them, and I do think they are worth considering, and I'm gonna spend a couple of minutes making my version of that case. And my case revolves around this idea, diversity of consciousness. I will explain. Also, I owe Scott an apology. He said, give a talk about something you're passionate about. I lied a little bit. Psychedelics are not actually the thing I'm passionate about, it's this. So what do I mean? As you all sit here right now, you are in what most neuroscientists would call everyday waking consciousness. Aptly named, I suppose, since we spend 90% of our waking hours in this state of mind. And the state of mind is perfectly good for our modern life. It's very good at updating spreadsheets, driving cars, chit-chatting with your friends and networking, planning your calendar for next week. But you may have observed there are things this mode of consciousness is not good at, right? It may not be great at deep and sustained focus. It's not good at metabolizing really strong emotions. It's not good at delving deep into the past or projecting very far into the future or observing large patterns or changing patterns. But as human beings with these wonderful complex brains and bodies, we have these other states of awareness which are actually pretty well suited to some of these other things. This is not an exhaustive list, but I thought maybe you'd be familiar with some of them. And the thing about these states is they have all of these wonderful benefits about them. These benefits, which can really facilitate healing and deep personal insight and change, etc. The issue is, it's not really easy in our modern lives to access these other states of consciousness. And I'm saying this as a person who has been deeply practicing meditation and other mind-body practices for going on 15 years. And I recognize that most of the people I teach and train do not have the time to do that stuff, and I've spent a lot of my life trying to give people shortcuts. I'm not gonna start handing out acid, but I'm telling you, it's a really good shortcut. So, we'll get to this in a second. I realize that's all just like words on paper and concepts, right? I could tell you about different states of consciousness, but if you've never meditated for like days at a time or taken a high dose of psychedelics, this is all just like conceptual to you. It's all abstraction. So I'm gonna try something a little different today. I'm gonna try to take you inside one of my own psychedelic therapy experiences. Again, never done this before, so we'll see how it goes. Strap in, as they say. Part 3, Justin has a rough month, does psychedelic therapy on himself, and makes sense of his entire adult life. Well, that's all. 2023 was a pretty big inflection point for me personally. I completed the 5.5, 6-ish year odyssey that was my PhD. I was relaunching my business with my awesome partner, Ian C. Williams. Also launching another venture parallel venture on the side. And then in the fall, my wonderful partner of 4 years decided to break up with me for like no reason. Don't worry, this is not like an Alanis Morissette like revenge breakup song. Just want to paint the picture. October was really hard and I was really sad. But what I came to after days and days of meditation was that it seemed like the threads of my life were really starting to come together in 2023. And at the same time, everything was ending and falling apart. And I was really in a really interesting place. That, in the world of psychedelic therapy, is what we call a really good why. Preparation is an important phase in psychedelic therapy. You gotta have your why very well understood because psychedelics are very impressionable. The mindset that you bring in and the problems that you bring in really influence the way your experience goes. So after several days of meditating and sobbing in my apartment, I realized I was due for a double dose. The first dose, I'm here, it's okay, I made it. I was gonna do 2 psychedelic journeys because the first step was I really just had to do a lot of grieving of the loss of my relationship and really every other part of my life that was coming to an end. And once I had done that and I was prepared, then I would really think about how the threads of my life were coming together and what the future was gonna look like. So, not ambitious at all. Journey number 1 was straightforward but pretty profound. I took 4 grams of mushrooms, I laid down in my bed, and I sobbed for 3 hours. Now, that might not sound awesome, but one of the wonderful things about psychedelics is that they make experiencing really heavy emotions a lot more palatable than normal. And I actually had this experience after a while that I was like a giant old tree. And I felt this giant old tree of myself crashing to the ground over and over. And on one hand, I was sad to see this thing that had been growing so long crashing to the ground, but I was also simultaneously having the realization that it was clearing space for something new to grow. Right? Like when the tree goes down in the forest, it's sad for a minute, and then all the other stuff starts growing immediately. And I knew this had to happen, as sad as it was. And, as a man born in the 1980s in the Midwest, for whom feelings, may or may not be kryptonite most of the time, that was pretty cool. And as I explained to my good friend who's a psychiatrist, it was like 6 months of therapy in 3 hours. Not to minimize the experience and go through it quickly, it was remarkable, but mainly it prepared me well for journey number 2. Now journey number 2 was a little bit different. This one I did with a close friend of mine, someone else well-versed in the mind, body, and psychedelic arts. We did it 3 weeks later, but I knew this one I was gonna need to pull in a little more perspective and inspiration, and I was right. Now, another thing that can happen on psychedelics is you can enter these very dreamlike states. Some brain scientists have compared it to lucid dreaming, if any of you are familiar with the concept, where like you're in a dream but you kind of know you're dreaming. And so in the second trip, a dream started to emerge, and it actually started during the journey and then came together in what psychedelic therapists call the integration sessions after. Conversations with your facilitator, and then for me, continuing to meditate on those images and stories in the weeks after that. And so what I'm gonna tell you is the story that emerged. And if you wanna get really trippy with me, you can close your eyes and try to kind of like step into the dream with me. If you want, I'm inviting you. If you want to keep your eyes open, that's cool. There are just a couple of slides. If anybody can catch this Saturday Night Live reference and name it later, bonus points for you to be awarded later. If you're planning to close your eyes, now's the time. So in this dream, I was part of an ancient land-based clan. And I was a young, kind of brash, cocky kid in this clan. No relation whatsoever to my actual life. And I was ready for my coming of age ceremonies and rituals. I was really, I was agitating the elders. I was saying, like, I'm ready to become a grown-up. I'm ready to go through the process. And of course, the elders were like, nah, kid, you're not ready. Not yet, not yet. Of course, I pushed and pushed. The more they resisted, the harder I pushed, and eventually they said, okay, first you need to learn the ceremonial dances. And I went through the ceremonial dances. I picked them up very quickly. And they said, okay, good job. And I said, all right, I'm ready for my vision quest. Give me my vision quest. And again, the elders were saying, I don't know if you're ready yet. I don't know if you're old enough. I don't know if you're prepared for that. And I pushed, and again, they finally relented. And they said, okay, here's the deal for the vision quest. We take you out to the woods, several days journey. We blindfold you so you can't see where you're going. And then we leave you out there. And you have to find your way home all on your own. So on top of that, there are 4 different places, 4 different sectors in the woods, each one in an increasing layer of difficulty. You're kind of a youngster. We're not going to take you beyond the second point. So they're taking me out there, and of course, I start pushing them again. Take me to the hardest drop point. I said, no, kid, you're not ready for that. And I pushed them and pushed them. I'm sure I was insulting them and so forth, pissing them off enough that they took me to the furthest drop point in the woods. And then they left me there. They returned to the camp, and then I was gone for weeks, and weeks, and weeks, and weeks, to the point where the other people in the village were seriously worried about me. And they're asking the elders, can you go out and get him? What if he's dead? And they said, no, we can't go out and get him. That would interrupt his journey. I said, well, what's happening to him out there? What do we do? He said, well, we don't know because we've never dropped anyone out that far. No one alive has ever been out that far and made it back. And why'd you do that? Why'd you drop him? Like, he asked for it. So eventually I did make it back. And I didn't look very good, but they nursed me back to health, and when I was healthy again, they had me sit down by the ceremonial fire with all the elders, and they asked me to tell the story of what happened. And this is what I told them. I told them when I first got out there, of course, I had no idea where I was, and I knew that if I had tried to start walking, I would probably get myself more lost. So I realized I needed to just focus on figuring out how to survive. How to feed myself, how to protect myself, how to avoid predators. But before long, I was encountered by a very big wolf. And I knew right away this was not a wolf I could fight. This is not the hero story where the initiate kills the animal, brings the head back, and celebrates. Not like that. So I had to try something else. So I reached out to the wolf and I asked it for help. And the wolf stared back at me for a few minutes, and then it lowered its head and it let me pet it. And so the wolf and I slowly built a little friendship, and we learned to help each other out, feed each other, protect each other. And thanks to that wolf, I survived for several weeks without knowing where I was. But I was able to get my bearings and start to learn my way around the woods and start to turn my attention outward. pay attention to the trees, pay attention to the other animals, pay attention to the weather patterns. And eventually I started to get a sense of how to navigate out there. And that was when I met my second animal friend, the eagle. And I noticed one day that the eagle had a fish in its mouth, and it hit me. There's water somewhere nearby. So the wolf and I started tracking the eagle, and we tracked it for days and days, and we finally tracked it to a big lake. And that was important, because I knew that the lake somehow emptied into a river. And once we found the river, I recognized, and I said, yes, that is a river I recognize. That is a river that my clan fishes from. And so we were able to track back along the river, and after several days, I made it all the way back to my clan. So that was the story. The elders looked at each other, and they nodded, and they looked back at me, and they said, great story, welcome back. Your job is now to tell that story to all the initiates. Tell them how to navigate the woods. And that was the dream. So if your eyes are closed, you can open them. So that's like 1% of what tripping is like, just in case you're curious. Thanks, man. Just like take that and then lose all touch with reality and like your body and self, and that's tripping. Okay, so what did I take away from that story? Like, what was that to me? For me, it helped me understand the connection between my very diverse, zigzagging adult life and the work that I do now. And the way I would explain it is, when you approach a moment of uncertainty, your basic human instinct is probably to run away from it, right? Right? Get out of that moment of uncertainty as quickly as possible, give me the answer, go home, get yourself out of the woods. I sort of inadvertently turned my entire adult life into one giant vision quest where I never went home. And along the way, I realized I cultivated a specific skill set for navigating the unknown. And I've spent the last decade plus teaching that skill set to other people. And the dream actually helped me understand what the skill set was that I was teaching. It starts with acknowledging and giving attention to the unknown itself, right? Or suppressing or avoiding your instinct to flee from uncertainty and acknowledging that it's real and that it exists and that it is your life. And when you embrace that reality, you also embrace the idea that to grow, you actually need to seek out the unknown. But that courage is just the first part. A lot of people will teach you that first part. The second part is vulnerability, because once you're in the unknown, to survive, you have to start acknowledging your own feelings, tuning into your own intuition, and reaching out to others who know a little bit more than you and might be able to help and collaborate with you. And once you've done that and you've figured out how to survive this unknown, then you can do the final step, which is actually pulling away from the self and turning your attention outward to your environment, seeing the larger context, being able to read the signs, and understanding the relationship between where you came from and where you are and where you're going. That's the higher perspective. And if you can do all three of those, and you can build those skills and work them in a cycle repeatedly, you get a compass. Because in the real world, where things are changing all the time, there isn't one answer. There's never one answer. The only way to navigate is to have this skill set and have a compass to navigate your changing selves and your changing groups of people in the context of a changing world. Oh, this is the pitch part. So what I ultimately understood is these businesses I've been building for over a decade, this is what I do. With my buddy Ian, we consult with organizations, and what we really do is we help them navigate change. And in my work with individuals, that's what I do. Helping people understand how to navigate change in their career and their life. It helps to have a really professional navigator like Dean driving, but if you don't have him, give us a call. By the way, I tried so hard. I called Dean and I was like, please tell me you have a photo of your Ford Escort. It was one of those that's like all tricked out with the tinted windows, huge speakers in the back, it was bright red. I was like, this would just slay if I had it for this time. But again, pre-cell phones. It was like, if he had a photo, it would have been print. I'm sorry, I was gonna put this photo up right at the end, like with the word navigator over it. Would have been amazing. Picture it in your mind. Instead, you just get my website. If you want to learn about the work I do, if you are an organization or a person who is looking for help navigating uncertainty, go there and check it out. And now you can ask me questions. Oh, man.
So all I could think about was Aaron Rodgers. So what is Aaron Rodgers and the Pat McAfee show doing? Is he adding credibility to your experience and kind of this movement, or is it a false representation of this kind of wow?
Do they talk about psychedelics?
Oh, he goes on ayahuasca trips.
Oh, that's right. Rodgers does that stuff. I'm not super plugged into the Aaron Rodgers experience. Here's my concern. Yeah, that's totally a fair question. Here's what I get. I think it's great that psychedelics are getting like popular coverage. I think that's good. What worries me is that this thing can turn really quickly, and it has throughout history. Psychedelics can be very threatening to people, and this whole game can get shut down in an instant. And so it does make me nervous that if these things get a little too out of control, one or two really bad stories could like turn everybody against them, and then they're going underground again. This is like a little golden age we've got. So one of the reasons I decided to come out here and do this publicly, because I'm usually pretty underground myself, is that I want people to understand kind of the best case ways to use these things. Because I don't want those bad stories getting out there and shutting down the whole game for everyone. Man, I wish Aaron Rodgers would probably shut up though.
I couldn't help notice the parallel between your the people that asked you to go on mushroom journeys and the exact same questions I had because I want to forage for mushrooms.
Okay.
I have all those same questions for edible mushrooms.
Okay. So
It wasn't really a question.
I was gonna say.
Just an observation.
So you want my advice on how to talk to people about your foraging? So hold on. Here's the advice.
Is he
Yeah. Be vulnerable. Okay.
Can you describe, like, so when you see patients and they ask for these types of medicines, is it like done in a controlled environment or do they take it home? Like you mentioned, you had like a 3-hour crying session in your head. Like, would that happen in like a doctor's office or is that like back in house?
That's a really good question. First, are you an officer of the law?
No.
Do you work for the DEA? Okay. So I don't. It's usually not my goal to do psychedelics with people, but people do approach me. Like in my one-on-one work, sometimes people will approach me and they'll say, "Hey, is this something we could do?" There's a whole process by which we will decide if it's a good idea. To answer your question about what the actual experience is like, yeah, sure. I sit with people. I do not do mushrooms when I sit with people. I hold the space, I guard the room, I make sure you don't have to worry about anything else. And yeah, sometimes people will start bawling. And that's a good thing, you know? Sometimes people won't say a word for 3 hours. That's happened too. Then they come out of the peak of the ride and they say, whoa, that was amazing. I had so much to tell you. So there's a huge range of what can happen in that experience. And then afterwards, you know, we'll kind of download the experience, and then integration, we'll do it, you know, within the next couple of days. It takes time to process that experience, especially if you're doing psychedelics. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Back there, yes.
What do you have to say about microdosing? Feels like that's becoming popular. People taking small amounts daily.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I've never done microdosing. I only go big, man. So I'm not. I'm not qualified to speak on it. I can totally understand how small doses would be beneficial. You can certainly get that sort of lowered inhibition. I can see how it could increase your focus, increase your creativity. Those are the things that are being studied. Researching microdosing is really hard for some just procedural reasons. But a lot of people have really positive things to say about it anecdotally, so that's the best I can say. I mean, there are people who've said, that microdosing on LSD has cured their depression. So, yes.
Is there a where you shouldn't do it? Like mentally you're like, oh, you know, I have too much trauma, maybe I shouldn't because it's gonna open all these things, or you get what I'm saying? Is there like, how can you tell if this is the not the path I should take, or, you know, should I try it and just see, you know, so you don't have a bad trip?
That's a great question. So I would say two things. Number one, if you're worried about trauma coming up, if you're genuinely concerned about that, don't do it alone. For starters, I highly recommend, again, not a medical doctor. I highly recommend consulting one if you're worried about anything like that. Or if you want to intentionally work through trauma, definitely seek the help of a mental professional. I will not name names, but there are people in the Twin Cities who are serious trauma, trauma knowledgeable mental health professionals who also work with psychedelics. But generally speaking, you would do work on the trauma for quite a while before you would do the psychedelic experience. So again, I would not approach anything like that lightly. It's very possible, again, I have a lot of faith in these substances. As long as you create a very safe space for yourself, there's only so much that can go wrong.
Okay.
But if you really want to have the best experience possible, get help.
What's the safest way to get your hands on some of your drugs?
Which one, Scott?
One thing.
Okay, so by assume by safe you mean legal. So let's start there. So again, the plant-based organic ones are legal in the city of Minneapolis. So if you know somebody who has some and you can get them from that person, you are pretty much not at any.
Stores, I don't want to know.
Target.
There are places that are less legal. You can order some stuff online, like chocolates. There's another loophole. I'll tell everybody about this. Luna Wolf Sanctuary, a registered religious organization, and if you can get registered as a religious organization, you can pretty much do whatever you feel like. Supreme Court ruling, no one's gonna mess with you. So they operate out of Lake Herring Spiritual Center. They do ayahuasca ceremonies. They do iboga. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, which is a different hallucinogen, which I'm not super familiar with. Does that answer your question, Scott? Talk to me later. Jerry. What is my PhD in? This will be really shocking at this point. It's interdisciplinary. Largely speaking, psychology, design, education, and behavioral science. I studied problem solving. Okay. Oh, I thought you had a question. Any more? We good? Good, okay, we gotta leave time for the last person. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah.